So if you clicked on this video, you already know what is about to be unboxed. This is a Rolex Daytona 126515. That means it is a rose gold Oysterflex Daytona. And as you can see right here, it is in the new box, which has a little eco thing on there, as well as recyclability within the EU and some other random things. This is just a dust cover. Pretty standard. And let's just open this. And now here you can see this is the newly redesigned outer box with this dark green cardboard. Previously, I believe this was a tan color, and nice little gold Rolex embossed parts right there. It's just a box, so don't read too much into that. Let's open this up. And now here we have the new Rolex actual watch case, sorry. Not watch case, but packing, shipping, transport box. Before we had a little cutout over here. The wave motif was not this dramatic. And I think this is made out of fake leather, or it's always been made out of fake leather. But this might be even more dramatically fake. But you do also have a new set of hinges on these boxes. I did purchase a Sprite back in March, which did have this newer box. But granted, I believe it was the medium-sized version of this box. So imagine just taking it down like an inch or so. That was the box size. And now without further ado, that's what the boxes look like. Sometimes you'll get a little piece of flat soft packing paper on top to prevent the cardboard from scratching this box. But to be honest, this box isn't too special. And now let's take a look at the watch and reveal the watch. I guess it's not that much anticipation because you guys already know what watch this is, but boom. Oh, a nice amount of glare on there. Let's arrange this a little bit so you can see this watch a little bit better here. So this is the Rolex Daytona 126515 on the Oysterflex bracelet. And we have this little protective plastic cover here. I'll take that off so you can see this watch and its bezel in its full glory. This little Rolex tag. I do have the white hang tag behind this part right there, but I don't want to show my serial number, so we'll keep that hidden back there. And this is where you also have the cards and warranty papers and everything there. And receipts there, but you know, everything's just in here. I purchased this sales tax free. This watch was $39,000, $300. So that's the benefit without the sales tax. In any other states that does have sales tax, you'll probably be paying around $440, $41. But here we have this beautiful rose gold on rubber bracelets because it has a little blade of titanium running through there. And it is quite a beautiful watch. And we'll do a few size comparisons as well as take a look at this watch specifically. This is a 40mm watch. I have my Submariner here, which is a 41mm watch, so you can see a little bit of the size difference. They're very nearly about the same size. And then over here I have a 42mm dress watch, and I have about a 7¼ inch wrist that wears a little bit flat. I don't know what's going on with these angles right here. It's making my wrist look really small and this watch look huge. So I promise you my wrists are not that, my wrists might actually be that small, but 42mm watch, 41mm watch, and a 40mm watch. So let me take off this watch here and let's take a look at this Rolex Oysterflex Daytona. So we'll start up with some of the major differences with this watch versus the previous generation Rolex Oysterflex. So a key difference is going to be the bezel. So you do have a ceramic bezel, which is not new, but now the ceramic bezel is encased in a little gold ring. So the ceramic bezel is placed on top of this gold ring, and then together that's all mounted to the case. So if you do damage your ceramic bezel, it's going to be a little bit more expensive to replace on the newer Oysterflexes than the older Oysterflexes. So before we dive into about some of the specs on this watch, some of the key features and differences, let's go over what this watch is. This is a Rolex Daytona 126515. I've said that maybe a few too many times now. The last 5 indicates that it is made out of rose gold. The 1 in 515 indicates that it is a Oysterflex watch. That is this rubber part right here with those very nice and comfortable billows. I do have a 42mm Yachtmaster as well. And the specific dial on this is going to be the Sunburst or Sunray, or it's Sun something, but it is the rose gold colored dial with the black subdials, as you can clearly see here. But this is a beautiful watch, and I think this might be one of the best Daytonas out there on the market. So that's what this watch is from a high-level summary. When we look at the primary dial, we see that there is the hours and the minutes, and you also see a static second hand there. And that is because that is not the second hand, that is actually the hand for the chronograph feature. Which I think this might actually be my first chronograph that I had, because I didn't own any Rolex Daytonas before this or any other chronograph watch. So this is actually my first chronograph, and you actually have the running seconds hand there down at the 6 o'clock. So let's give this a few extra winds just in case. I don't know if this watch is actually a flyback, and I don't intend on finding out through first-hand experience. That'll be a question for Google or ChatGPT. I'm really hoping it's a flyback, because Rolex being an extremely hardy tool watch, you would expect them to, you know, factor in idiot mistakes of accidentally resetting this watch while the chronograph is running. And yeah, so before we try out the chronograph, I outlined what each of these subdials are. Bottom 6 o'clock subdial is the running seconds hand for your timekeeping functions. The subdial on the 3 o'clock is the minutes counter for your chronograph, and the subdial at the 9 o'clock is your hours counter for the chronograph. And then of course out here is your tachometer that measures units per hour. So if you imagine units per hour for the seconds hand, that is. So if you're timing something and it takes you 20 seconds to complete, that's going to place it down right there, and you should be able to complete 180 of those cycles within an hour. Is there a sticker back here? This feels like there's a sticker back here. Well, that just might be my muck. So let's try out this chronograph real quick. So this watch is waterproof, and it has the screw down crowns on the chronographs. To actually start and stop the chronograph, you do need to unscrew these, at which point you will compromise your water resistance, which I think is really inconvenient, because when you're actually wearing this watch, this is an impossible feature to tighten down or loosen up. And I'm also waiting to the very end to put on this watch so you can see what it looks like. So to start the chronograph, you use this top left pusher here. That's a very nice, positive click and feel. And if you're imagining right now we're timing something, so if it takes you this long to complete, you'll do 400 in an hour, 300 in an hour, 240 in an hour. So this effectively just tracks your cycle times or timing features. If it takes you 55 seconds to drive around a lap, you're averaging around 60, drive around the lap that is a mile long, you're averaging around 65 miles an hour. Or if it takes you, 40 seconds to complete a task, you can do that task 90 times. So again, not sure if this is a flyback. I don't want to hit this pusher yet. So to stop the chronograph, this pusher again, and now let's see that reset. Very nice, very immediate. Now let's tighten these crowns up. And boom. So as you can see, having these screw down crown pushers on this Rolex Daytona, it actually makes it pretty difficult to use as an actual timing watch. In my mind, and from my experience so far, it really does feel like you need to take this watch off entirely in order to use the chronograph feature. And that detracts from the convenience of timing objects versus on the Submariner, you can just crank this bezel to whatever point and sort of start the timing there. Granted, this method is a lot more rudimentary, a little bit less precise, but arguably a lot more convenient than taking your watch off. So let's go over this watch real quick. So as you can see, you have that sunburst sunray dial, the ceramic bezel that is found on the precious metal Oysterflex watches, the stainless steel watches, or the Le Mans series of Rolex Daytonas. A notable feature from these newer generations of Rolex Daytonas, starting with the double digits, the 116 and the 126 series, you now have symmetric lugs. So if you look at vintage Rolex Daytonas, you will notice that these two lug sizes are not the same. From vintage Daytonas from the early 2000s and 90s that are made out of precious metal, you would find that this lug is actually slightly skinnier than the lug on the left. And the idea behind this is to balance out the design, because you have these very big heavy features here, the crown and the two pushers. And I guess Rolex thought by taking some metal off of these lugs, you can create a more balanced, symmetrical design. But I think with these newer generations, they've done away with that. They acknowledge that this watch will be a little bit crown heavy with those pushers, and they've just begun to fully embrace that. So those are some of the minor differences on the case. Between this watch and the previous generation watch, as I mentioned, you do have a different bezel, and you do have a slightly different subdial design, where the outer tracks, the sort of railroad tracks on the subdials, are a little bit skinnier than the previous models. With the Oysterflex Daytona, you do have this little half end link right here on the Rolex Yachtmaster. You do not have this feature, and the Oysterflex just pushes up all the way to the case. I think this adds a little bit more of refinement to the Oysterflex Daytona series, but I also like how unrefined and how brutal the Yachtmaster 42 is there. So moving away from the case, yes, look how beautiful these pushers are. 3 dots here on the crown to signify that this is made out of a precious metal. No display back like most Rolexes, excluding the limited editions and the land dwellers. And now we have probably one of the best parts about this watch, and that is the Oysterflex strap. So on the surface level, this looks like a pretty standard rubber strap. But if you take a look at the cross section, if you were to cut this in half, there is actually a small piece of titanium, very flexible titanium, that runs through the strap to give it extra rigidity, as you can see, as well as give extra supports and add additional levels of structure to this. And that is just on the outside and on the internals. When you look at the inside of this watch, you can actually see that there are these little billows here. So when you actually put this watch on, your wrist isn't actually touching a flat piece of rubber, but you're actually touching these two pieces of rubber with this nice air channel that runs through there. So when you are wearing this watch on a hot and sweaty day, you do have some airflow underneath the watch, which will certainly add to the levels of convenience if you're wearing this watch out in Dubai or Miami. And I think those are the primary venues that you'd actually wear, you know, a gold rubber strapped watch like this. And those billows are featured on both sides of the strap. And now as we approach the actual buckle, this is a great new feature that is included on the 1-2 series of this. So with the Rolexes that came out within the last 2 years. So with this buckle, you now have glide lock. And this is the same glide lock system that is found in the Rolex Submariner. Granted, I think this is at maybe 15 millimeters instead of 20 millimeters. You can see that total amounts of adjustment right there. You do have quite a bit of adjustment. And actually, let me pull out my Submariner. We can do a quick comparison here. So you can see the levels of adjustment on my Submariner. On my Submariner here, you can see there's maybe about 6 visible slots there. And on the Oysterflex, you see 4 visible slots. And each one of these slots is about spaced 2 millimeters apart from each other. So on the Submariner, you have advertised 20 millimeters of micro adjustments. So I'm guessing on the Oysterflex Daytona, you'll have about 16 millimeters or 14 millimeters of micro adjustment, which is more than enough for a watch like this. You know, around half an inch, that will allow you to fluctuate between a tight fit on your wrist and a loose fit on your girlfriend's wrist. So if you're a guy and you're buying a watch like this and you have a girlfriend who likes shiny objects, be aware because she might start wearing your watch. This Glidelock is one of the major reasons why I decided to buy a Daytona like this. For me, Glidelock is absolutely necessary for every single Rolex that I have. If a watch that I own does not have it, I find it seriously upsetting and a little bit disturbing. So during my last couple of times looking at watches, I also did find out that the clasp used on the Oysterflex Rolexes are also the same clasp used on the Yachtmaster 42s in precious metals. So the part numbers are actually exactly the same when you compare the yellow gold Oysterflex Yachtmaster to the yellow gold Oysterflex Daytona, which also makes me wonder if you could put this Glidelock clasp on a solid gold bracelet Daytona. It would be quite expensive. I believe this clasp, if you were to buy it alone from Rolex service, costs between $8,000 and $9,000, which is pretty expensive. For benchmarking, the deployant clasp on this watch costed about $9,000 as well. But I think this is made out of platinum. Some people have said it's made out of white gold. I can't find any formal stampings on the clasp, but you know, it's around the same price as a clasp for a deployant clasp for this beautiful dress watch. So yeah, those are some of the key features I really like about this. Of course, on an Oysterflex, you do have the double folding clasp here to allow for a more safe wearing experience so it doesn't fall off. And now this will be the first time putting this on camera for you guys. Of course, I put this watch on in the actual boutique to, you know, do the whole unveiling, putting it on, trying it on, looking at it in the mirror, that whole romantic experience there. So now let's just throw this bad boy on the wrist, on my 7¼ inch wrist, and you guys can see how it looks. Look at that. Oh, that looks good. I did mess around with the Glidelock, so I'm not sure how well this will fit, but look at that. This is lovely. This is a beautiful, great fitting watch. And now with the big reveal done, you guys know what this watch looks like on my wrist. I do like this Oysterflex bracelet because these cushions, those billows underneath, do push the rubber straps out a little bit. So, and I think you'll be able to wear this on an even smaller wrist. It does add a lot of heft and it makes your wrist look bigger. All right, guys, that's it for this quick unboxing on this Rolex Oysterflex Daytona. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it and you're appreciating the pivot that this channel took, please let me know. I have a lot more watches that I'd love to share with you, and stay tuned. Thanks, guys.